When we were boys, we had dreams of glory. Adventure was everywhere. Our courage was boundless. We were brave knights riding to take damsels from dark towers, clean-cut cowboys shooting down the bad men, drivers of mail trains thundering through the dark. Then we grew up into warehousemen or clerks or clergymen, and the bold dreams were cast off with the short trousers. But there are a few grown men who've hung on to their dreams, who've devoted much of their manhood to preserve their boyhood forever. Men like the Reverend Teddy Boston, rector of All Saints, Cadeby, near Nuneaton.
I'll bring the coal up, Roy.
He's a bachelor, lives with his ex-nanny, who's 90 years old and still worrying about his dirty hands. For Teddy's dream has come to life. He can feed it, water it, and ride on it. Its name is Pixie.
What you want to remember is to steam on a bright fire and not on smoke and black coal. So if you keep a bright fire and feed it frequently, with a little coal at a time, you'll get some steam very quicker than if you bang the box full of coal and hope that it'll burn through. She's all right on the cylinder.
Good.
Wonder what's about the other side.
I don't know, we're running low on cylinder.
Oh, Lord. I better get another drum in then. Give her half a tank. You've got to look after her. The last thing we do is to keep her clean. We like to do that as well, if possible. Yes, we're all right this side.
Good.
Got the drains open.
Right.
About it, I think.
Yeah.
Good, man. Right, let's go. Yeah, whoop, easy does it. Come on, she's out. Whoop. Isn't that urgent?
Now, how long is the railway, actually?
Well, actually, I'm afraid it's just over 100 yards long, although we say that we've got a run of a furlong in the Light Railway Garden timetable in which we appear.
You appear in the timetable?
Yes.
You actually have a timetable?
Oh, yes,
just
we have a
to run to?
timetable. I think we've probably got one on the engine. Oh, yes, here we are. Open up, page 2, I think. No?
What times are you supposed to run?
I think it's 2:30. Let's have a look in the timetable. We'll soon find out. Where have they put us?
You obviously don't keep to this
Cadeby Light Railway. 2:30, 3:15, 4 o'clock, 5:15, and 6 o'clock not after September. That's departures from Cadeby. We come to Hinkley Road Halt, which is halfway down the line.
That's about 50 yards from the start.
That's about 50 yards from the start. 5 minutes later. This is a fairly easy running time. And we arrive at Sutton Lane, which is where we're standing now, at 2:40 from the 2:30. Then we come back at 2:50.
I didn't actually notice a station at Hinkley Halt or
Hinkley Road Halt. Well, actually you wouldn't, because the hole in the fence has grown up rather since we cut it in the first place. But you can get through to the main road from there.
What sort of comments did your parishioners make when they learned that their rector was putting a railway in his back garden right next to the churchyard?
Oh, they weren't surprised a bit, because, you see, I used to go and do the shopping with a 10-tons Aveling and Porter steamroller. I've been doing that for a long time. And they've got used to these little eccentricities. So life's much easier there.
What about the women in your life? I know you're not married, but there are some.
Well, there's a dear old lady of 90 who lives with me. She doesn't like it at all. She gets strong opposition from her. She says it's a dirty pastime, and it makes my hands dirty, and I ought to be ashamed of myself. Unfortunately, I'm not. I enjoy it enormously. So we have to try and keep her happy and keep the railway going at the same time, which sometimes is complicated.
She remembers what you were like as a boy, of course.
Quite, which was very similar to what I am now, thank God.
Did you want to be an engine driver then?
Yes, I think so. Hello, Dick. Got the paper? Good. Oh, that was the verger. He also delivers the paper.
Has this started any ambition in you? Would you like to go to bigger and better tracks and bigger and better engines?
There are two very good reasons for this. One is that there's nowhere to run bigger engines. Unfortunately, the official attitude of British Railways isn't very friendly at the moment. It's just a pity. It may perhaps change soon. But the only place you can run them is on preserved lines, which are comparatively short. Obviously, I should like one or two. But another very practical reason is that a friend of mine owns the Princess Elizabeth, which is one of the LMS mainline express engines. It takes him 2.5 tons of coal before he can raise steam. I can do it on a 100-weight, which I can bring up in a barrow from the bottom of the garden, and I can steam at any time. It's much more convenient having a narrow gauge line on site of the rector than it would be having a full-size locomotive somewhere down in Devon. That's the main reason I don't particularly want to go on to the full-size stuff. There are plenty of other people doing it, and they come here and share narrow gauge, and I go down to their full-size lines and share their standard gauge with them.
Do you ever have to justify to yourself the time and effort you spend?
I used to think about having to justify it until on one occasion we had a school party from Leicester. It was mostly coloured children from one of the poorer areas. And the sight of their eyes riding in the coaches and the absolute joy that they were obviously experiencing made it well worthwhile all the sweat and all the trouble and all the time that's been put into the building of the line. It gives so much pleasure to so many other people besides myself that I think it's well worth doing.
The Reverend Boston has to abandon Pixie sometimes to care for his parishioners. But on the Isle of Sheppey, there's a man who can live in his railway fantasy every hour of every day. Vic Martin's retirement bungalow is called Warden Central. The station is on no railway map, appears on no timetable. But in Victor Martin's mind, it is a station. Not on the Isle of Sheppey, but on the pre-war Midland Main Line between St Pancras and St Albans. Every day, Vic and his wife Lou put on their uniforms and go on duty. The platform, the crossing gate and the signals are full size. But these are only the trappings of the dream, the frontiers to keep reality at bay. There are no trains for riding on. You can't go anywhere from this station except in the mind. All the visible moving parts of Victor's dream world are built in a 60-foot hut with a signal box at each end. To enter her husband's world, Lou becomes the signalman at Swale Tunnel Junction, working her trains every day to the old Midland rules, on the up line to St Pancras.
There's a freight coming down on the... on the relief line. So then I have to look and see if there's space for it to go through, and it can go right through, so I can put the distance off.
That's because your line is quite clear, is
yes,
it?
You see, if there's no lights there, I know that it's a straight-through run. That's to say the train is entering my section.
And when you were married, Mr. Martin, did you have any idea that you'd have to let yourself in for this sort of stuff?
Well, no, not really, because we hadn't got this box then. I used to do a little of it in the other, when we had the little box. Because my father was on the line all his life, so the jargon's so familiar that it comes back to you, you know. My father always talked a lot about it. It takes me back to my childhood, really. It's rather fun.
The trains can only be seen over the 20 yards of track between Lou's signal box and Vic's. Then they disappear into a loop of tunnels around half an acre of garden. But in Victor's eye, they're heading for Glasgow, Nottingham, Manchester and Leicester, and it may be weeks before they're due to come back.
Hasn't cleared the line yet, but won't be long now. There goes, there's the first one, there's our starter, we're away. There's a train being offered on the up road. That's the fast. I'm just watching the freight away to see her distance off, and it is, we're away. 6:35 to Nottingham. I'm just pulling off the signals now on the up road for the fast. Now putting down the block sections for it and having a look on the track circuit to make sure they're clear. I'm looking out for the freight, see that she's coming up all right on her track circuit over there. Here comes the up now, just coming. There she is, she's passing through that signal box. We're now putting the block over and here she comes. Always a good train this, all the way from Glasgow. Now going up through Clarence Tunnel to St Pancras.
How much difference do the uniforms make? Have you always used uniforms?
Yes, we've always used them. We've been very fortunate in having uniforms, you see. And so, of course, we've always used them.
Does it make very much difference to the way you feel about it? How
well,
important?
I think it does, really, you know. We always have used them, you know. It sort of gives the effect, I suppose, and that kind of thing, you know.
Would you have liked to have been a railway?
Oh, yes, I would. In 1914, I was very, very keen to go on the line, and I was a young lad then, you see. I was at school, my father took a very poor view of the railway altogether, really. And he, you know, had different ideas, thought I ought to go through the varsity. We lived in Oxford, you see, and that was a good opportunity, but I wanted to get on the footplate. I did get on for about 2 days on the Great Western, but he soon got me off.
Now, how long ago did you start planning to have your own railway?
Well, I started planning to have my own railway, I've known all my life I'd really do it, you know, and I started getting ready in 1937, started buying equipment, and so a good job I did, because it'd be a terrible price today. And I'd saved up about, just over £300, I suppose, for this railway job, and I spent a lot, and then of course the war broke out. Excuse me a moment.
What's happening now?
Got a train stuck at St Pancras. I have to go up there and see what's wrong, because you do get these things go wrong sometimes, and here's one going wrong now. So I think we'd better go and have a look at it.
Think it might be a crash or something?
No.
Derailment?
No, it wouldn't be a derailment. Might be mice, you know, got dirt on the rail, because that's the sort of thing it looks like, you see. Anyway, we'll deal with this up train first, and then we'll go in and see what's wrong with that after.
Now, just how responsible do you feel? I mean, have you had an accident in which you've had casualties?
Yes. Well, there's a coach over there. I believe I showed you earlier on. Got the end smashed in. Can you see? We use it now at the side of the line to make their tea in and all that kind of thing, you see, that old coach over there. Well, that's made of Bakelite. The firm unfortunately doesn't exist today, but used to make some quite good rolling stock, although I haven't got a lot of it. And a train ran into the back of that through an error of the driver, which was me, you see, because my wife doesn't drive the train, she works the signals, but I'm not only working the signals, but driving them. And I ran into the back of that train, and the train that ran into the back of it had 2 engines on it. And so it smashed the end. That was the last coach. Smashed the end in, and we reckon that about 8 or 9 people would have been either killed or pretty seriously hurt, because of course it smashed all the end of it and derailed the coach as well. So I think that's the worst accident we've ever had.
What other special trains do you have to run then?
Well, you run Easter, you see, about a week before, or Whitsun was the last holiday. We got together, the wife and I, you see, and we said, well, now, we ought to run 10, 15 specials, you see, say 5 on the down road and say 6 on the up. Well, then you look at the timetables, and of course you've got to think that usually over holiday time the workmen's trains are not running, so you've got little spaces there where you can fit one in, or you can run it where freight normally run, you see. A freight working may be off, and you can put one in there, you see. You work that all out beforehand, like the railways do. And of course, you know, they print these special instructions which are issued to all signalmen. Well, then we write 2 of these out, and Lou has one and I have one in this box, and we put them here, and there they are, you see. And you keep the count of the special trains on a special sheet. You write down the time the train left and where it's going and so forth, and we can look back on these sheets right back to 1948.
What would you say was the biggest crisis you've ever had on the line?
Well, I should think Suez, probably. You know, there was a crisis some years ago, and of course we didn't know that they would, how many troop trains they ran, but we imagined they did, you see, and so of course we had a terrific number of trains down to Southampton and the other ports for the, we imagined, of course, for the War Office and the government.
Some want a railway, some want a big hat, a saddle and a gun. Several nights a week, Noel Evans, engineer, becomes Marshal Jim Slade. Joe Lees, electrician, becomes Lash LaRue, and they shoot it out with friends behind a warehouse in Manchester 14.
Closing, lads. Well, first, the approach, generally, was rather sketchy. Now, when you were clearing your guns, there was two on the wrong feet. You were, Lofty. You started, you spread yourself, and one gun was slightly back, and you started on the wrong one. But nevertheless, the approach is there, and the guns were in action reasonably sharp. Noel was okay, except that he was watching slightly to the side, instead of watching his front. Anyway, the general approach was okay, and it just needs a bit more practice to develop a good stance. Once you've got the automatic reaction of a gunman, you don't worry. You're watching your front, you don't worry about your movement, you don't worry about where your gun is pointing, it goes.
Now, your cowboy name's Marshal Jim Slade,
That's
isn't
right,
it?
yeah.
That's the way you're known. How deep does this interest in the West go? How real is it?
It goes very deep. It's very real because I like to live the West as near as I can to what it really was. I don't go a lot in for this fast draw, really, because there's a lot of people doing it today, and they're not cowboys at all. After all, I can ride my horse, I can rope, I can do all the things that should be done.
How near can you get to a cowboy's life in Manchester?
Quite near. Outside of Manchester, there's a lot of places places we filmed ourselves, which would look very much like the West. You couldn't tell the difference. We often go up there, we take our little covered wagon up, and we have a night there, and campfire. We go riding. Oh yes, as near as anybody possibly can get. Yet I couldn't make it any better. It doesn't matter how I tried, because not unless I started going modern, the Royal Rogers type, with fancy trimmings. I don't wish to do that, because the cowboy wore his stuff for a reason. I mean, everything was for a reason. His hat was for a reason. Kept the sun out of his eyes. It gave his horse water. His jacket was to prevent him getting cut to pieces. His boots were to protect his legs. Everything he had was for a reason. It wasn't just for show purposes. I like to wear mine the same way.
What's a weapon like that worth these days?
About £100. Buy a gun like that.
What else have you got now?
I have another one, which is another one. That's exactly the same gun again, as you can see there, with different grips on it, pearl grips. And I have here, this is a replica of the old cap and ball pistol. Type that they used to put the powder in there and put the primers on. That is the one that came out before this. I could really get some fun out of shooting this and, using that for shot.
How many guns have you got altogether?
I have about, somewhere in about 10 pistols and 4 rifles. This is the one of the rifles. It's the real Winchester itself. And then I have a very old gun, an old Henry, which I wouldn't part with for the world, somebody gave it to me. And,
What do you reckon it's worth, all told?
All told, I should imagine this altogether, the equipment I have is about £3,000. Would be quite easily. Probably more, I've never really got down to.
What do you think it is in these days which keeps you doing it now? Is it a kind of Walter Mittyism? Or...
Well, I can give you 2 reasons for that. One is we do live a kind of Walter Mitty life, but we try to make it real. And then there's just one other important thing, and that's this. Let's face it. It's nice to think we've done something different once in our lives. Everybody does the same thing practically. We're doing something different. And it's really nice to think we are doing something different.
Cowboys in Manchester may seem to have been fetched a little far. But over the garden walls in Oakhurst Road, Eastbourne, is a man who is the sworn enemy of all cowboys. A man who for 60 years, beginning when he was 9 years old, has admired the Red Indian and all his works. Edward Blackmore. Chief Hunkershnee, Chief Thoughtful, Chief works wonders.
It is a known fact that in the old days, Indian men could, and actually did, run up to 300 miles non-stop on foot, which of course seems quite impossible to us these days, but there's no doubt they did. Perhaps the most famous case of that was the famous Sioux Indian Rain in the Face, who, when he had been arrested by Captain Tom Custer at Fort Abraham Lincoln, managed to escape from prison. First of all, Captain Tom Custer got two of the strongest troopers to hold Rain in the face, while he kicked him and punched him until he was unconscious. They shackled a half-hundredweight iron ball on Rain in the Face's ankle, and he was waiting to be hanged about 2 days later for having killed 2 white men single-handed. But the old soldier in charge of Rain in the Face felt sorry for him, unlocked the padlock and let him go. And Rain in the Face, in 2 days and 2 nights, ran 300 miles on foot, got back to the camp of Sitting Bull.
The impression we get of the Indian, of course, is of a savage, scalping chap who whips the scalps off women and babies as they're crossing to the far west.
Yes. Well, of course, it was white men who first started scalping among the Indians and encouraged the Indians in it, all the while it suited their purpose. And there's not the slightest doubt that in the old days there were far more Indians scalped by white people than there ever were white people scalped by Indians.
It must be pretty hard to be an Indian enthusiast to this extent here in Eastbourne.
Well, yes.
Are there any things that you can actually do? Can you live like an Indian here?
Well, yes, I've sort of practiced a good many Red Indian arts and crafts. This is fire lighting by friction. Now, a good many people have heard of this, but don't believe that it can actually be done. You know, most people have heard that you can produce fire if you rub 2 Boy Scouts together, but there were no Boy Scouts in those days, so the Indians had to use wood, you see. And this is how the Indians of most tribes did it. Now, first of all, they got a piece of wood which they cut flat, roughly into the shape of a board like that. They said fires must breathe to live, so they cut a little notch in the edge so that the air could enter through there, and so the spark could breathe and remain alive until they blew it into flame if they wanted to, you see. Then right at the end of that notch, they made just a little depression with a knife to keep this drill in the right place until it wore its way in, you see. And they had this bow with a loose string, so that when they gave the string one twist round the drill, it became tight enough that as they sawed the bow to and fro, they revolved the drill to and fro like that, you see. And then they had this little guide, anything hard with a hole in it, just to put on the end to keep the drill steady. And this is how they got to work. They didn't carry their tinder in paper bags, I'm afraid I do, but all that we need for this is anything that smoulders, you see. So here we have some old rag and tow. This is a very good substitute for the dried grass, shredded bark or powdered rotten wood that the Indians would have used. Now, whichever notch you intend to use, you place right on that. Then you hold the board steady with your foot like this. You rest the left wrist against the left shin bone to keep it steady. Put the guide in position on the top, and this is how we get to work. Keep the string fairly low down. No, not quite. Sorry, it's not too. Let's try this other drill here.
How much of an Indian do you consider yourself now, Mr. Blackmore?
Well, I have been adopted into 2 Indian tribes. First of all, I was adopted by Chief Oskinonton, the Canadian Mohawk Indian, in 1932. And nearly 3 years ago, I was invited by the Sioux Indians to go to South Dakota, where I was actually adopted into the Sioux Nation.
Is that much of a procedure? Is there very much ceremonial about it?
Yes. Yes, there was a proper ceremonial there, and I was actually adopted into the family of Sitting Bull, who, of course, was the most famous Indian that ever lived. And that had been the greatest ambition of my life for more than 50 years.
Are there many white men admitted to the tribe in that way?
Well, not so many now, I don't think. As a matter of fact, I believe I am the only Englishman now who has had the honour of being adopted into 2 Indian tribes, the Mohawk Bear Clan and the Hunkpapa Sioux. When Chief Oskinonton adopted me, he made me up this necklace of bear claws and bear's teeth. He drilled all of these bear claws and teeth on our kitchen table with one of these old primitive Indian pump drills, and gave these to me to prove that he had adopted me as his brother in the Mohawk Bear Clan.
How do the people of Eastbourne receive this? Are they becoming more interested in the Indian and what he does?
Well, I think they very nearly got used to me now. I've been at it for 60 years, you see, ever since I was 9 years of age. And most of the people now have got quite used to seeing me dressed up in this costume for various reasons.
Have you anything of a following, do you think? Have you got any converts to the Indian law?
Well, yes, we have all over the country. There's one other boy in Eastbourne who studies Indians now, but we have a Westerner Society in London, and quite a number of the members there are very keenly interested in Indians.
Is it still going? Is it? Oh, good.
Well, now that the pipe is going, I think we ought to have a prayer. The Indians always prayed when they lit the pipe of peace, so this is a prayer from the Omaha Indians. Wakanda the ki, Wakanda the ki, Wakanda the ki, Ihavani hingawi do hido.
What does that mean?
Well, the words of the prayer mean, Almighty Father, we offer this pipe, the symbol of our unity as a society. Please accept it at Mass. In the old days, you see, the Indians danced for 3 days and 3 nights with no food. They stared at the sun all day and at the full moon all night and danced like this. And on the 4th day they were brought out, as one observer said, more like skeletons than men. They were laid at the foot of the sun pole. They had 2 slits cut in each side of their chest, had wooden skewers pushed through under the flesh, which were tied up with rawhide thongs to the top of the sacred sun pole. And they had to dance round the pole until they tore through their flesh and got free. And in those days it often took them 8 hours to tear through their flesh and get free.
Do you feel any physical or spiritual connection with the Indians through all this study?
Well, just 1 or 2 small things. When I was a boy and learned to ride a push bicycle, I always mounted from the right-hand side. And, of course, the North American Indians always mounted their horses from the right-hand side. I would like to say goodbye to you now, as the Indians often said farewell to their friends in the old days in the Indian sign language. And this means, may the great mystery give you all much happiness now and in the future. And I will finish with a sign, my heart goes with you.